Before I begin, this encounter happened about 10 years ago. I was 22 years old, and I'm well aware that this was a very poor judgment call on my part. My parents always taught me to help someone in need, just not necessarily to the extent that I allowed. Up until this point, I didn't have much of a reason not to trust people may not have good intentions. I've also had an unreasonably difficult time saying no to people my whole life, and have since had the help of a therapist to be better about that. I've only told this story to a handful of people because I truly am ashamed of my actions and potentially putting my daughter's life in danger. I was on my way to an event of some kind with my 3-year-old daughter when I realized that I had left something behind in my apartment. I was close enough to home that I decided to turn around and head home. As I was pulling into the parking lot of my apartment complex, a woman was walking kind of in the middle of a driving area and began waving me down. I pulled up next to the woman and rolled down my window about a third of the way. She gave me the story of how she works at the nearby nursing home, and she had run out of gas on her way to the gas station and was asking for directions to the gas station. I didn't think much of the fact that she was roaming around my apartment complex because it was pretty common for people to cut through it, as it sat between 2 main roads and avoids traffic lights. I gave her directions for a 5-minute walk to the gas station, but she mentioned that she was pregnant and she wasn't feeling well. I tried telling her I was in a hurry and assured her it was a very quick walk, but she begged. At this time, she noticed my daughter was in the back seat. She had a look of surprise that I didn't think much of at the time, and she began talking to my daughter and made her laugh. She turned back to me and asked one last time if I could just drive her to the gas station. At this point, I just gave in. I let her in my car, and she almost immediately asks if I have any money she can use. My heart sank at that point, realizing she was probably lying and just wanted to lie her way into some cash. I was honest with her, and I told her I was broke, and I also didn't carry cash on me. She pointed out another resident in the complex and asked me to drive her to them. In my mind, there was still a slight possibility she needed gas, but didn't have the funds for it. So I drove her to the other person, and she rolled down my window asking for money. They said no, and she pointed out another person. At this point, I told her I really had to be somewhere and couldn't keep helping her. I drove her closer to the other person, but far enough that she would have to get out of my car to walk to them, which thankfully she did. Once she got out of my car, I sped off and drove to my destination. I told my mother about this story, and a week later, she sent me a clip from the local news. The news mentioned a woman who would approach people asking for a single favor, which led her to asking them for money. If these people said no, she pulled out a syringe or a needle of some kind and would threaten to stab them with it, and did end up stabbing them on one occasion. I look at the image of the person and instantly recognize that this is the woman that was in my car. I know these types of people don't have much of a conscience, but I truly believe the fact that my daughter was in the car that day is what kept that woman from stabbing me. So this was 2 to 3 years ago in India, and my father and I were driving home from a wedding. I don't know how much y'all know about weddings over there, but this was a 3-day event that involved the entirety of 2 middle-of-nowhere-nothing villages. It was a huge deal, and we were the only white people the majority of these folks had ever seen. So beyond the bride and groom themselves, we were the best guests. This meant near constant attention, no relaxation or any time to ourselves, and sleep came in the form of a concrete slab of a bed with a thin blanket over it, nestled snugly in between apparently every drunk uncle the village could hold, all passionately arguing for hours about something in Hindi. I think it was maybe the music, which also constantly blared from concert-sized speakers through the whole village. It was safe to say by the time we left the wedding, we were already extremely sleep-deprived and out of it. This isn't even the fun part, though. Through an odd chain of events that isn't totally related to this story, while driving home on the single-lane road that had traffic in both directions, dodging donkey carts, groups of scooters, and other drivers at about 120 kph, 72 miles per hour for us freedom uniters out there, we get in a head-on collision. I remember realizing what was going to happen a few seconds before it did, closing my eyes, loosening my body, making sure my tongue would be okay, and then, bam, the world turned upside down, and then again, and one more time. Our car flipped 4 times, landing upside down in an overgrown field near the spot of the accident. The other car was mostly gone, and what was left of it was still on the road. Glass was everywhere. My dad was unconscious. My lehenga was ripped to shreds, and there were suddenly voices all around me. I remember being extremely confused and dazed, and I hurt. Why did I hurt? Dozens of people had apparently stopped to flip the car back over to help the American tourists out. A few people pulled me out through the left-hand broken window and immediately went back in to help my father on the driver's side. I, extremely confused, exhausted, and scared, most likely concussed, I later found out, definitely concussed, wandered over to the road and the other demolished car. I could hear a siren in the distance. An ambulance? Cops? I didn't pay attention. Where were my shoes? Suddenly, a man had his arms around my shoulders and was ushering me to an unknown white car, a small distance from the wreck.
"I will take you to the hospital,"
he said. I asked where my father was, and a few other questions. He mostly ignored me.
"He is fine. Come on."
He pushed me forward, and in a daze, I followed, asking about my things, my shoes, my dad. All I had was my phone, which was still in a death grip in my hand. He ignored me.
"Don't worry. Hurry. Get in the car."
I did as I was told, though I remember asking a few more times about my shoes. I was barefoot and limping. I remember being focused on my right foot, how it wouldn't work, basically ignoring the guy guiding me away from the accident and the rest of the people. Why did it hurt so much? And where was my bag? The man urged me forward some more, making promises that my things were fine. He had them already. Just get in the car. I was barely paying attention, slowly following. Where was my dad? At that point, I guess the man decided I wasn't moving fast enough. He wrenched my phone from my hand, maneuvered me into the back seat, and slammed the door behind me. He was walking around to the driver's side when an ambulance pulled up. I struggled with the door, saying I'll get into the ambulance instead, that my dad must be there. And where were my things?
"No."
He slammed the door again, locking it this time.
"Be quiet."
At this point, I started crying and was still confusedly trying to open the locked door, blubbering that I needed my things. He insisted he was helping and to shut up, shut up, shut up. He rushed around, opened the driver's side door, and was about to get in when I heard an almost roar-like sound erupt to my left. Suddenly, my father was there, bleeding, limping, ignoring the chaos all around us, and angrier than I've ever seen him. "Get my fucking daughter out of your fucking car!" He grabbed the man, who was halfway in the vehicle at that point, and threw him to the ground, unlocked the backseat door, and rushed around to pull me out. "Dad, where are my shoes? Does he still have my phone?" I obliviously asked into thin air, as my father was already back a few feet away, shouting, hands around the man's throat, demanding my phone. With a terrified look, the man pulled it out of his pocket and threw it several feet away, causing my dad to drop him on the pavement in one swift motion and bound after the device. At that point, the man hurriedly climbed into his car and sped away, while I made my way to the back of the waiting ambulance, still not really processing what just happened. My dad materialized on the bench next to me a few seconds later, my cracked phone in his hand, and enveloped me in a huge hug while saying how scared he was. The paramedics moving all around us, securing everything and preparing for the drive to the hospital. Everything after that is a story for another time, but to the random Indian man who most likely tried to abduct me from the accident, let's not meet again. I'm a 22-year-old female. At the time of this incident, I was about 16 or 17 years old. Because of what happened, I now never walk anywhere by myself after dark. I had decided to sneak out to meet up with a friend, but neither of us had a car, so we were going to walk and meet up halfway between our houses. The halfway point was about a 40-minute walk. We ended up meeting up at around midnight, and the walk there went fine, no issues. We hung out for a while and ended up losing track of time. It was now about 3 a.m. I had to get home before my parents woke up for work, or risk getting caught. We said our goodbyes, and I started my long walk back home. Since it was 3 in the morning, it was basically a ghost town, not a person in sight. I hadn't seen even a single car drive past, so I figured I would have a nice walk home. I was wrong. About 10 minutes into my walk, I hear a car coming up behind me. Nothing too alarming about that. As the car passed me by, they slammed on their brakes, then cut off all their lights. Immediate red flag. I saw the car turn down the next street ahead. I knew I would have to pass them to get home. Instead, I ran into a nearby parking lot, hid in the bushes, and pulled out my phone to call my sister, to, at the very least, let someone know where I was at and what was happening, and call 911 if needed. I unlocked my phone, and of course, 1%. Fuck. Then my phone died. As soon as this happened, I started to panic. I waited there for what seemed like forever, and decided to start towards home again. I start walking again and past the streets they turned on, and didn't see any cars. I started to relax until I walked a little bit further and saw the very same car parked in the Burger King parking lot. As soon as they saw me, they started to back out of the parking lot and head towards me. I bolted across to the other side of the street. Instead of staying on the same road, I ducked into a neighborhood that would let me go back to the main road, but closer to my house. I got back onto the main road and thought I was in the clear. Then, sure enough, the creep was driving towards me, and as soon as he passed me, he made a U-turn so that way he could follow me again, driving slow enough to be directly behind me. Luckily, another car was coming up behind him, so he was forced to speed up. I saw him up ahead, going to turn around again. I took this opportunity to lay down in the grass between someone's fence and the sidewalk, just out of sight, so any passing cars could not see me. After he passed again, I got up and started sprinting towards a neighborhood that would lead out to another main road that my house is off of. I made it to the main road, and it was so close to my house. But again, I see the fucking car. He passed me and started turning around. I ran across the street and through this field, and hopped my neighbor's fence, cut across my court, and ran inside. I had never been so happy to be home. This guy followed me for my entire walk home. I'm not sure what would have happened if I just kept walking and ignored all the warning signs, but I know his intentions were not good. It was by far the scariest thing to ever happen to me. Creep that followed me for 40 fucking minutes. Let's never meet